Our first speaker is someone who's been making a noise since about the 1980s. Sandy is a great advocate for people with a mental illness. Fascinating and interesting person. I invite Sandy now to join us. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay, I think I'm ready. I too pay my respects to the Indigenous people on whose land we stand today and acknowledge your elders past and present and all of the above. Thank you to Dave and the organising committee for inviting me to speak here today. I just hope that what I have to say is reasonable, is relevant and not too outrageous or too uninformed. So what I'm going to do is start with a poem because that's what I do. I masquerade as a poet. And the poem is called The Mad Woman in This Poem, and it has a quote from a friend of mine, Gudrun, who wrote these words, "Yet how stupendous a psychosis in which God is heard." The mad woman in this poem. The mad woman in this poem lives on the 22nd floor of a block of flats, her husband and children gone. Each day she waits for a letter that never comes. Her wrists carry a flurry of scars. Her arms are dotted with cigarette burns. Every day she contemplates jumping. The mad woman in this poem walks the streets, reciting Shakespeare and Milton. She shelters in bus stops and doorways, scrounges through rubbish bins, drinks from discarded beer bottles, begs for money to buy cigarettes and a moment's respite. The mad woman in this poem slumps into the ramshackle chair, hiding herself. Her large torpid body founders. Her heavy breasts gush a drug-induced lactation. Her body grows with each anti-crazy pill she reluctantly swallows. The mad woman in this poem transfixes in front of the TV, absorbing its many messages. Ally McBeal is her daughter. Eddie Maguire can read her mind. Ridge and Brooke are talking to her, are going to come in a helicopter and take her to Venice to meet Brad Pitt. The mad woman in this poem lives in a holy grotto, awaiting the pilgrims. She carries the burden of Eve, smells God in the toilet, sees the Virgin above the lintel, has given birth to the new Messiah, carries the secret of the Holy Grail in her heart, was raped by the devil, sees maggots wriggling in her stigmata. The mad woman in this poem is sure Beethoven stole the 9 symphonies from her, cannot walk on the cracks of the pavement, can feel spiders eating her brain, fears her head is about to explode, is going to the firing squad next morning, is a character in a Bruegel painting, is an oracle of the dead. The mad woman in this poem is every woman, is any woman, is a mother, daughter, sister, lover, friend. The mad woman in this poem is me. So that's the mad woman. So now the paper. And I have called it Death Sentence to Healing Words, a meditation on poetry, madness and recovery, ? We each of us have our paths to walk. For many, the path is fraught and difficult. My road travelled is one that is echoed in the words of the great Florentine poet Dante, when he describes his descent into the festering interior of the Inferno. Dante tells us, "Midway along the journey of our life, I woke to find myself in a dark wood, for I had wandered off from the straight path. How hard it is to tell what it was like, this wood of wilderness, savage and stubborn. The thought of it brings back all my old fears. A bitter place. Death could scarce be bitterer. But if I would show the good that came of it, I must talk about things other than the good. My dark wood, my wilderness, savage and stubborn, has been the difficult life and my many meetings with my madness. I often describe myself as a hamburger with the lot, or a walking soap opera, an episode of The Bold and the Beautiful, as my life has too often imitated the dramas and tragedies, the farces and follies of these fabricated lives. Sadly for me, it was a reality I couldn't walk away from. But madness is the monster that has defined my life for 40 years. Indeed, how hard it is to tell what it was like. Words can barely convey an experience so remote and profoundly personal as madness. Yet words are powerful tools, and in my writing I seek to do the impossible, to illuminate for everyone what it means to have entered the dark side, to be captured by strange and curious creatures that inveigle themselves into one's psyche, where one becomes a morbid dreamer. I only have words, and they often take me on a journey far beyond anything I have known and to places I never knew existed. Perhaps that is a healing of sorts. But I must talk about things other than the good to show the good that came of it. Catastrophe struck in 1976. I was 23, a graduate, and looking to the future when madness in its insidious way crept upon me, and I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. It was a death sentence. There was no presumption of capacity, no notion of a positive future, no thought of achieving anything worthwhile. I was even told by one psychiatrist that with every psychotic episode I had, I would go deeper into madness from which I would never recover. And this seemed to be the way it was playing out, as I had many episodes and many admissions to Larundel Psychiatric Hospital. My trajectory was a downwards one, from studentship to dole to sickness benefits to an invalid pension. I was on the scrap heap of society, a society that shunned the mad and locked them away in loony bins that stood on the edge of town. I am a relic from the old days of the madhouses and long incarcerations. I am a relic from Larundel. Perhaps my only relevance now as a public loony is a historic one. A psychotic episode is a hideous nightmare from which you cannot wake. One could be a twisted character in a Bruegel or Bosch painting, or a dissonant set of notes in a Webern quartet. One is lost in a Kafkaesque world of bizarre and peculiar places where shadows come to life. Psychosis is a horror story, a fantasy of demons and angels, a pageant of lively characters from a sideshow, a procession of heroes and angels and villains sent to give cosmic messages. We are shades from the underworld and prophets of the apocalypse. We are poets of the mad mind's eye, seeing the world through a prism of distorted darkness and light. In madness, we can appear inspired because our imaginations are in overdrive. We are at the limits of our creative capacity. To the uninitiated, we are inconceivably creative with a special knowledge of the world. But psychosis is a deranged work of art where ultimately it is only meaningful to the mind furnace that forged it. It is a world we are unable to share with the rest, as we are lost to the hallucinatory fervour of a fractured mind. We become unreaching and unreachable. No one can know the agony, the terror, the veiled spaces into which the mind disappears. How can one convey the horror of being captive to denigrating and abusive voices? Nefarious voices, whom I've named Tweedledum and Tweedledee, who harangue and harass and pontificate, voices who have no regard for my feelings or well-being, voices without a conscience who despise me and who delight in my misery. These miserable, dysphoric voices are parasites who feed on my mind and my thoughts. But they must be suicidal, because if I did kill myself, as they continually exhort me to do, then they die too. So how stupid is that? I cannot believe their stupidity. But that's how it goes. And how can one convey the power of being in the thrall of delusions? so wild and so perplexing that there is no explanation for them. I have been Eve. I gave Adam the apple. I brought original sin into the world. My thoughts are being broadcast to the world. There's nowhere to hide. Tony Blair has implanted a microchip in my left ear and programmed it to delete my thoughts. I am evil. I ooze evil. Do not touch me lest I contaminate you. My hockey coach is sending telepathic messages about me to George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice. So madness has no scruples. It's a howling dream where our minds, which we can no longer trust, have gone into meltdown, and the world is tainted by misapprehension and false information. I am the centre of the universe, and madness rules it. The centre cannot hold. A consequence of such a catastrophe is the loss of identity and loss of optimism for the future. My already fragile self was torn apart like a piece of Velcro. I had nothing to call myself, no job to speak of, no sense of self, of being a person of consequence, no hope, no purpose or meaning in my dislocated life. I was invisible in the world and moved as a shade among my friends. I hated going out to meet people because they always asked the dreaded question, "Hello, what do you do?" To which I had no answer. And as I watched my friends getting on with their lives and careers, getting PhDs and finding rewarding jobs, and I was very happy for them, their successes highlighted my failure. And an awful dependency developed on my friends for support, the state for my pension, the mental health system for treatment. Getting out of bed is an act of hope. I had no reason to get out of bed. I held no hope in my heart. I was a lost soul drowning in a mire of madness. They were dark days, lived in the savage, dark wood. Death could scarce be bitterer. Being mad meant that you became embroiled with psychiatry. My wise friend Julie has written, "A life of total psychiatry will take away your soul." And it's true. One's life can be consumed by psychiatry. I used to mark the passing of time by my fortnightly Modicate injections and my psychiatrist appointments. And I've taken countless medications, including the old antipsychotics. Yes, I have done the Stelazine Stomp, I have done the Modicate Shuffle, and yes, the new antipsychotics, which when they were introduced came with an enormous fanfare about how they were going to revolutionise the treatment of schizophrenia. It was an overestimation that was profound. They have not done what they have said they were going to do. So the side effects of the drugs are debilitating and they're awful. And I have made a Sophie's choice to manage my mental health by taking medication. Why? Why do I do it? Because the terrors of psychosis are so great, are so profound, that I have clung to the hands of psychiatrists proffering medications. Why? Why do I do this? Because medication has offered me some respite, though no cure. But I say this to psychiatry, and I say it to them very, very seriously. You can medicate the brain, but you have to talk to a mind. In the minds are our dreams, our aspirations, our hopes, our longings that are the essence of our soul. It is the soul, often murdered by mental illness, that needs healing. And when it is broken, it needs to be restored. I'd like to read a poem now about medication because I've taken so many medications over the years. This is a 40-year history, so you can imagine what I've taken. And this poem is called Medicated. And I was lying in bed one night and I had this idea. I was Largactyled. And suddenly the name of all the drugs became verbs. So, medicated. Roll up. Join me on the medication trolley. I've been on it for years. I was Largactyled with bitter syrup. I was pimozided and meloruled and numbed. I was so stellazined, I was like a cat on a hot tin roof. I've been modicated into a shuffle and clozapined into a stupor. I was serenaced to drowsiness and abilified to sleeplessness. When I was risperidoned, I lactated like a cow. They cogented me to stop the look-ups, but I kept looking up. I was lithiumed and epilumed to even my pendulum. I've been imiprimined, prothiodined, lexaprode, effexored and zolofted to happiness. I was valiumed and atavanned into tranquility. At bedtime, I was mogadoned, stilnoxed and temazepammed to slumberland. Now I'm zyprexed and ravenous and fuzzled. I'm lamotrigined and balanced and Sarah quelled. Yes, indeedy, I'm medicated and dedicated to the medication trolley. Here's looking at you, pill bottles. So that's medication. So, in those grim early years after diagnosis, I started documenting my madness in poetry. It was something I did out of a need to understand what was happening to me. Poetry was a mirror to my madness, to my mad self. But what was important was what each poem gave me. When I held a poem I had written on a piece of paper in my hands, that was a transcendent moment because that poem was testament to my existence. That poem was evidence that I was still alive. And at the time that was momentous because nothing else was much giving me a sense that I was alive. It was so important. And these poems were little morsels of sanity that came from the far side of madness. The Australian poet Bruce Beaver, who suffered from bipolar mood disorder, understood the power of poetry in his life too. He reflects in his poem Bedside Library. If madness interposed, then poetry became the sanest thing with which to counter it. Where would the mind have wandered to without the exercising yard of prosody? The social theorist Theodore Adorno said two things in response to the Holocaust. To write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, and a beautiful thought in a time of pain is a lie. Surely, in times of distress and pain, whether it's cultural or personal, we more than ever need the compelling powers of poetry. Poetry seeks to peel the layers from life's distortions and travails, to give meaning where meaning cannot be found. Canadian poet Gary Geddes suggests poetry has the power to cut through all the crap we accumulate in our lives and touch us to the quick. There is exhilaration in poetry. Language is elevated to a new level that goes beyond reason's domain, and poetry explores this unknown terrain, some saying it enters a kind of madness of its own. My poetry is wrought from my mad mind's journey into the heart of a darkened soul. This soul-searching has stirred a poetic eruption in which we can utter the unutterable, say the unsayable, speak the unspeakable, and sense the insensible. In poetry, we can explore the savage dark wood and the fear it instills in us. We can challenge existing truths in imaginative and confronting ways that are ennobling and profound. In my poetry, my aim is to move angels to tears and make a stern God laugh. And I believe there is a poem in every heart and a heart in every poem. In what can only be described as a miracle, the poems I had been writing eventually found their way into a book. Poems from the Madhouse was published in 1993, and it had a profound effect on my life. It gave me back an identity, something to call myself other than schizophrenia. Doors opened and a new life beckoned. It was a positive affirmation of me as someone who had something to offer the world, and it was my poetry. And it made me visible in the world again. I'd gone from being invisible to being visible in the world again. And that, for me, mattered. To feel visible is to feel as though you matter to your friends and to other people. Not that I go around saying, hello, I'm a capital P poet to people. I don't do that. But down where the spirit meets the bone, I knew I was a worthwhile person. I had a new and positive sense of self that I could live with. But poetry did not, and has not, cured me of my madness, nor can it. But it helps me to deal with the dramas and disruptions by giving me hope and something to hold in my heart. Poetry has restored some purpose and meaning and given me something to build a life on. But how fragile this all is. Recovery is a profoundly unique experience, a change to the way one sees oneself. It is a process deeply felt by all who enter its realm, and not one that is easily or lightly attained. Each person's recovery will be different. Recovery might be getting out of bed for one morning of 1 week for one person, while another person's recovery might be getting a full-time job. It is not a linear process. It may have twists and turns, ups and downs that make it a harrowing experience. It is hard fought for some, and one that comes after a long and fraught campaign to find meaning in a life when all has seemed lost. There are setbacks and triumphs. Recovery is about self-understanding, about finding hope, a reason for getting out of bed. There is no right or wrong way to recover. And my personal recovery, as opposed to clinical recovery, is much more than the absence of symptoms and functional impairment. It is leading a meaningful and fulfilling life with or without ongoing episodes of illness. I talk of recovering with my schizophrenia, not from it. I live with its spectre every day of the week. It is a constant. I go to bed to my voices every night. I harbour delusions that fester beneath the surface. A psychotic blowout always feels imminent. What keeps me out of the loony bin is Team Sandy. Not Team Australia, not Tony Abbott's Team Australia, Team Sandy. My friends who have stuck by me, pets, poetry, yes, a sign of recovery is writing a poem, my hockey and tennis teams, and music, listening to it, and playing my viola and violin. This little device here, my MP3 player, this is a godsend. This is the best piece of technology ever invented. This is this is what gets me through the night. When my voices are rattling at me, I plug in my little MP3 player, play all my Scottish fiddle music that I love, and I just listen to the music at night to try and fill the void that the voices might invade, or to try and drown them out. So this is my godsend. I love this technology, and I'm a technophobe. So being a technophobe and loving technology is a contradiction. Anyway, that's it. I love my MP3 player. Now, and of course, and as inexact and problematic as psychiatry is, and as shaky as the ground on which it sits is, and with its checkered history of abuse and coercion, why wouldn't one be critical of psychiatry? Yet, I choose to engage with it. I see my psychiatrist and psychologist. I'm high maintenance, so I have to see them. I see these people because the therapy room is where I take my soap opera life. It's an attempt to maintain my sanity by separating the mad from the sane, to keep the monsters at bay by caring for my mind. I call this my psychological dialysis. Team Sandy has helped me to live a productive life and not descend into unreachable madness. It is the bedrock that has given me the absolute privilege to be able to imagine and create, to contemplate the abstract and concrete, and to stand in front of an audience like this today. How privileged am I to be here today doing this, and to demonstrate that although many of us live with schizophrenia, we are not monsters. And I hasten to say that Tweedledum and Tweedledee have been banned from Team Sandy for inappropriate behaviour, using foul language and abusing the umpire. They're not allowed into Team Sandy. They're banned. I don't like to think of recovery as a singular, individuated project. It is done better when there is collaboration with treating teams and friends and family, when the person is not atomised and isolated. If I have learnt one thing from my battle with the brute madness, it is that I cannot wage the war against it on my own. We live in a neoliberal world in which the individual is elevated above the collective, and I wonder if this paradigm hasn't infiltrated the recovery model. We say to the consumer, we will resource you to facilitate your personal recovery and then make it the responsibility of them to recover. And some of you must do this in isolation. Recovery doesn't happen in a vacuum. The demise of the drop-in centre is a case in point of dismantling a collective place of support. Drop-in centres were where mad comrades, as I call them, offered each other support and found strength to deal with their mental illness and the stigma it attracted, where they shared their war stories and found humour with each other. But drop-in centres came to be seen as enclaves of consumer dysfunction and became and because they no longer fitted into the personalised recovery model, have been defunded. Now, I remember talking to a carer in Seymour in Victoria, where my fellowship closed down the day program and the drop-in centre, and I said to her, "What is your son doing now?" And she said, so tragically, she said, "My son is sitting in his room by himself, smoking himself to death." And I thought, that's a good outcome. So a person may be at the centre of their recovery, but what surrounds that centre can strengthen or weaken it. When the centre cannot hold, it needs to be supported. But sadly, not everyone is in that fortunate position to have their team to support them, nor does a personalised recovery plan suit some when they don't have the necessary tools, ability or attitude for a worker to utilise in their recovery work. Mental illness and recovery is a complex beast. In the Victorian Barwon region, the trial of the NDIS highlighted a great deficiency in an understanding of this complexity. On the one hand, we talk about person-centred recovery and hold great hope in its efficacy. On the other, consumers were told they will only be eligible for the NDIS if they declare they have no chance to recover or no hope to recover. What does this perverse disregard of the complexities of what it means to live with a mental illness do to the hearts and minds of people who are already fragile? I'm not even sure of the wisdom of subsuming mental illness into the same category as physical and intellectual disability. I can see some very big cracks opening and what will happen to those people who fall through them. A lot has changed since the good old Arundel days, but a lot hasn't changed, and we are still hearing the same stories we were hearing 40 years ago of abuse, neglect, disregard for carers and reviled treatment regimes. In this brave new mental health world with public psych wards, which are smaller, there are no gardens, no open spaces, they are riven with endless boredom and admissions are short, they are traumatic and disturbing places, women suffer abusive male patients, Violence is too easily provoked. Nurses barricade themselves in the bloody fishbowl doing paperwork. There is deep discontent among my mad comrades about how they are run. Everyone is risk averse in a litigious world. There is no asylum when asylum is what is most needed. It's a mad world. And here I'd like to read my poem, McMadness. This is my take on Victoria's mental health system. I'm not sure about the rest of Australia, but McMadness. Hello. Do you have a Big Mac delusion or a cheeseburger delusion? Is that one voice with grandiose ideas or two voices of persecution? Have you spent all your savings and bought 3 new Ferraris and a Rolls lately and slept with every Tom, Dick and Jane? Are you self-harming or feeling unremitting misery? Then drive through the fast psychiatry ward. We'll have you McDiagnosed, treated, medicated and McSane in 2 shakes of a pill bottle. And by the way, if your suicidal threats are only attention-seeking, leave now because you're wasting our time. Now that you are McSanity is our business. Now that you are here, terms and conditions apply. You can only stay for a few days, but don't worry, we'll get you McSane before you can say, can I have some compassion with that? We'll give you drugs that will fatten you up, kill your libido, make you dribble and constipated, turn you into a zombie, sedate you to exhaustion, eventually bring on diabetes, cardiovascular disease and premature death. We'll have you out of here like shit off a shovel, even if you're still mad, because there's someone madder who will need your bed. And don't worry, we'll give you a McHappy pack full of pharmaceutical goodies free of charge to take with you. And just to make sure you're somewhere in the system and can't do a runner and not get treatment, we'll slap a community treatment order on you. And we'll offer you McTherapy to help you cope with isolation, unemployment, poverty and rejection. We'll have you McSane if it kills you. And now for some McTherapy. Hello, how are the voices today? Keep taking the medication. We have to finish now. Do you need a prescription, credit or savings? See you in 6 months. So, here's McSane and out of the bin and back in your care. How wonderful that you can experience deep emotional fulfilment by looking after your psychotic son 24/7 with no support and no resources while you hold down a job and try to keep your family happy and your marriage intact and not lose your friends. Don't worry if he can't cope when he's threatening to kill himself. The CAT team might pop in a couple of times a day just to make sure things are okie dokie. You'll survive the other 23 hours of worry and stress and doing the best you can in an impossible situation because you always do and because you love him. And if you are desperate, you can have some McTherapy too, because your McSanity is important. It's a McMad world. Everyone has forms to fill in, boxes to tick, I's to dot, T's to cross, performance requirements to meet, risk assessments to make, and pressure. Fast psychiatry is the name of this game. McSane, we've done it again. For many people, the medical model is characterised by an awful pessimistic determinism. That is, illness without a cure and rudimentary drug treatments. And many do not want to engage with the hopelessness of this. However, I believe I am a constellation of many factors: childhood trauma, biology and psychological vulnerability that have created in me a mental illness. This is the narrative I have given myself to make sense of my experience. How else can I explain my behaviour? How it is treated is another thing. The rise of alternative models is an exciting development. The Hearing Voices Network, open dialogue, intentional peer support are some of the new paradigms to challenge the medical model. And it is the frustration that consumers and carers have with traditional psychiatry that has given rise to these activist approaches. I have to confess, however, that I haven't engaged with these alternative models. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Why? Why haven't I? Perhaps because I'm too unadventurous to try them, or too scared to rock my boat, or because I have been blessed to have my team to support me. And because I continue to engage with psychiatry and talk of mental illness, am I now just probably considered a conservative, old, irrelevant fart with nothing of importance to offer the mental health world? As I said, I am a relic. There is no magic recipe for recovery, nor even if we put in place all of the necessary components, is it assured for everybody. Mental illness is not that simply resolved because it is still not fully understood. I have wrestled with the beast for 40 years, and it is as mysterious to me now as it was when I was first diagnosed. It has been a long and arduous journey. There have been Everests to scale, deep troughs to wade. When my natural pessimism holds sway, I tend to say, I live a tolerable life with an intolerable and intolerant housemate called schizophrenia. And when the maudlin beast of madness always lies in wait, sanity is brittle. Sometimes I do hold hope close to my heart, but mostly I fumble hope. How hard it is to tell what it is like. Nevertheless, life can be good, and as fearful as I am to acknowledge this, lest madness creeps upon me, I tentatively contend that for me, to write poetry after a winter of madness is sanity. Like Dante, who had his guide Virgil to take him through the inferno, I have had my team Sandy and words as trusty guides to lead me through the dark wood. Dante's epic voyage through a psychological and spiritual hell mirrors a life lived under the menacing shadow of madness. Tragically, some do not emerge from the dark wood. For them, there is unremitting suffering. Some emerge damaged and stumble along a troubled path, while many emerge stronger, wiser, and more determined, like Dante, who finishes the Inferno with the beautiful words, "We climbed first, and I behind, until through a small round opening ahead of us, I saw the lovely things the heavens hold, and we came out to once more see the stars." And I'd like to end with a homage to Larundel. This is a poem called Alice in Larundel Land. It's a great title. It's the title of a pantomime that was performed at Larundel in 1979 by the staff, and it was written by the then chaplain Len Blair. And I had to write this poem as a homage to this place that I spent so much time in, and I'll finish with this. Thank you for indulging me and listening, so I hope this makes sense. Alice in Larundel Land. Alice fell down a rabbit hole and landed in topsy-turvy Larundel Land, locked up, captive to lunacy and a passing parade of Mad Hatters and March Hares, eccentrics and musos and artists and a poet or two. An ordinary folk with the deepest sorrows, an inconceivable lunacy, sharing delusions like needles, voices babbling in the background, ECT before breakfast, stelazine for lunch, prothiodan for dinner, Mallarul at supper time, and to bed with a hallucination and a moggy. A place full of hunger, hunger for kindness, friendship, love. A curious, secluded world, its dark side kept well hidden. Shadow-haunted inmates longing for peace with themselves. No one knowing the wars that rage within or the deep pain wedged between spirit and flesh, destroying lives. Friends and family picking up the pieces. Larundel Land's red brick walls now rubble. windows shattered, graffiti telling another story, a playground for vandals and urban explorers, once peaceful gardens dismembered. Sombre ghosts roam the precinct, calling us to remember them. We will remember you, sitting in smoky rooms, crying alone, laughing with deranged angels, muddled and paranoid, chaotic and manic, anarchic and confused, prisoners stalking locked wards, keys jangling, medication trolleys rumbling into melancholic rooms, and the humour, the blacker than black humour, the cut through all the crap and misery humour. You will not be forgotten. We shall erect a monument to commemorate all who passed through Larundel land. We will remember the hellhole and sanctuary, the bottomless pit of despair, unexpected place of healing. Alice landed on her head in upside-down Larundel land, the madhouse that once stood on the edge of town, where time dawdled and everyone hid in the shadows. Thank you.